So just a very brief, what is trauma? And it's an event which overwhelms the brain and the body and is too much for the autonomic system to handle. And so it overloads and it goes into an adaptive state. And that adaptive state is very likely to be the cause of chronic pain. And I think this is from my book, Trauma and Memory. Yeah, it is. When a person is exposed to overwhelming stress, threat, or injury, they develop a procedural memory, sometimes called a body memory. And trauma occurs, as well as pain, when these implicit procedures are not neutralized. And the failure to restore homeostasis or balance, core balance, is at the basis for the maladaptive and debilitating symptoms of trauma. Yeah. And here are some of the physical effects that can occur with unresolved stress and trauma, with unresolved toxic stress and trauma. And there are common physical disorders, which can include, as I mentioned, gastrointestinal, particularly irritable bowel, cardiovascular, arrhythmias, and so forth, neurological, things like migraines, musculoskeletal, like fibromyalgia, respiratory, like asthma, dermatological, urological, and substance abuse disorders are very common. And substance disorders as a way to try to help manage these unbearable feelings and sensations, and to just tamp them down just once, to leave people to contribute to a life of misery for that moment. And again, the only way, I believe, that one can change the substance abuse is by helping the person find ways to healthfully regulate, adaptively to regulate. And that's what we'll be talking about a lot. And again, just giving a quick overview about unresolved trauma, what it can affect: depression, anxiety, chronic stress, chronic pain, PTSD, heightened states of fear, rage, chronic insomnia, even paranoia, dissociation, shutdown, isolation. We talked about addiction, and suicidal ideation, emotional suppression, lethargy. Along with lethargy, I would also add something like alexithymia, and bracing patterns, and I'm repeating myself, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and other digestive issues. And the list goes on and on and on. And it's, when somebody presents with those kind of physical symptoms, I always, especially if the symptoms don't shift quickly, in doing therapy, I really advise them to see a physician to have evaluated. Now, the converse is that many of the people have gone from doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist, with no cause found, and with not much treatment. We'll come back to that. So this is the iceberg, the giant iceberg. On the top, where I say explicit memory, what I should really say there is trauma symptoms like PTSD, like flashbacks, like hypervigilance, where the majority, the great majority of this iceberg, just the iceberg that sunk the Titanic, are made of implicit memories, procedural memories, somatization or somatic dissociation, shame, is also a really big component in this subterranean iceberg. And again, it's that when we see the person just with these very specific PTSD symptoms, we should know that that's possibly just PTSD, but it's also very likely that there's this whole underbelly, and that we have to work somatically with that. With that, yeah. Okay. Now this is a cross section. I think I showed this in an earlier webinar I did with you, but it's definitely necessary to review. And if you cut my brain and body in half, and then took one half away, and you're looking at that half, that's sometimes called the mid-sagittal view. And this area right in here is absolutely critical for everything. It really controls all of our instincts, all of our regulation. And then this other part, which is very closely allied with the brain stem, is the cerebellum. And the cerebellum, people used to, researchers used to, if you went to a physiology book at the time and went to the entry for the cerebellum, and it would say the cerebellum, the function of the cerebellum is to regulate movement. And that's true, there's no question about it. And by the way, usually there's maybe one or two paragraphs, and basically about the anatomy. And it became clear to me in my work that the cerebellum and the brainstem together were the matrix, the foundation upon which all of our sensations and emotions and feelings and thoughts are built upon. And now, starting from about 15 years ago, if you can go into the medical library, and there's a book this big about the cerebellum, and it literally connects to every part of the brain. It's evoked by movement and body sensory information, particularly kinesthetic, muscle tension information, and proprioceptive, where the body is in space. Also by movement and by acceleration for the vestibular system. And there are three main systems. There's at the back of the brainstem, and that dorsal just means back, is the 10th cranial nerve. And this nerve here goes, very primitive nerve. It's one of the most primitive nerves in the body, but it's also the biggest nerve and the largest nerve in the body. So here's the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve. That nerve goes down through the neck, down all the way to the organs below the diaphragm, but also it affects the heart and the lungs. And what has not widely been known, and if you even go to many current physiological texts, it says that it's a motor nerve. In other words, it's activating, instead of muscles, it's activating organs. But there's very little reference to the fact that it's also a sensory nerve. So it's actually relaying information about our guts and our other organs to the brain. So it's a way of connecting to monitor our internal state, and to know when we're in balance, and to know when we're out of balance. And again, 80 to 90% of that nerve is sensory, is taking information from the guts and relaying it back up to the brain. So let me give you an example about this connection. And if it feels like it's too much, just ignore it. Yeah, but imagine you're opening your door and looking out on the street, and all of a sudden you see somebody hit by a car. Well, the vagus nerve recognizes injury. The brainstem recognizes injury and sends a strong signal down to our guts. And so we see the injury and we go, oh. But since that nerve, remember, 80% is sensory, it's taking that yuck signal back up through the vagus nerve, the sensory portion of the vagus nerve, back into the brainstem where it gets amplified. So you're there, you see the accident, you go, ugh, and then you can see the person's really been seriously injured, and it's like, ugh, and we can get stuck there. And that's one of the components we see in chronic pain. Now, what I'm going to invite you to do is do a little experiment to see how we can regulate that nerve when it's been thrown out of balance. So again, when we have the image of the injury that goes down the vagus nerve, affects our inner organs, gets amplified, and we get into this, what I call a positive feedback loop with negative consequences. So it amplifies, and then guess what? After it's been amplified many times or multiple times, or maybe even one or two times, we then start to have gastrointestinal systems or heart arrhythmias. So here's an exercise that I'm going to offer. Again, if it feels like it's too much, just watch me and listen to me. But of course, you're welcome to do the exercise along with me. So the idea here is to interrupt that positive feedback loop with negative consequences. And the idea in this exercise is to make the sound boo with the breath, vibrating it. That's why I specifically use that sound. And I let the breath and the sound go all the way out, and then just wait for the new breath to come in, filling belly and then chest. So let me just demonstrate it. I'll do it a couple of times, and then you can do it with me if you want. When I feel the vibration in many parts of my body, but specifically in the guts, the viscera. And I wait for the breath to come in on its own, filling belly and chest, and then one more time. Okay. So again, if you wish to do it with me, please do it. And just notice sensations, feelings, images that may come up, thoughts that may come up, and not necessary to linger on them, but just to make a note of them. And then maybe you can take a moment to give feedback. So, okay, so let's do it together. Okay, easy, full breath. And just notice.